For decades, whenever India needed its most advanced weapons, it looked outside its borders, to Russia, France, Israel, and the United States. India had one of the world's largest armies, but much of its strength depended on technology built by someone else. Today, that story is changing. Indian-made missiles, guns, and defense systems are reaching more than 80 countries. This is not just about selling weapons. It is about a nation moving from dependence to self-belief. From being the world's biggest buyer to becoming a builder the world now trusts. Here are 10 powerful Indian-made defense systems and products that countries around the world are buying. Number 10. Body armor and protective gear. Starting with the least glamorous entry on this list, and one of the most consistently profitable. Indian-made bullet-resistant jackets and protective gear, produced by manufacturers like Kanpur-based MKU, are now shipped to militaries and police forces across a wide span of countries. Soft goods protective equipment carries fewer export restrictions than missiles or radars, which is exactly why it moves in volume, quietly, without ever making a headline. This is the category that will never trend on its own, and that is precisely the point of putting it at number 10. Real export strength isn't only measured in missile contracts, it's measured in how many categories of equipment a country can reliably produce and ship at scale. One figure circulating in Indian media claims bullet-resistant jackets are now sold to as many as 100 nations. Soft protective gear likely does reach a wider spread of buyers than heavier weapon systems, since the export controls on a jacket are nowhere near as strict as those on a missile. Number 9. 155mm artillery ammunition. India's largest single confirmed ammunition export deal came from Munitions India Limited, which secured a $225 million contract to supply Saudi Arabia with 155mm artillery shells, announced at the Riyadh Defense Expo in February 2024. It followed smaller but still significant earlier deals with the UAE, 40,000 shells for $40 million in 2017, and a further 50,000 shells for $46 million in 2019. Ammunition doesn't get the same attention as the weapons that fire it, but every gun exported eventually needs a steady supply of shells behind it. Whoever controls that supply chain has genuine long-term leverage. In 2025, India's own Ministry of Defense reportedly considered temporarily restricting 155mm shell exports so domestic stockpiles could be prioritized during heightened tension with Pakistan. Number 8. The WhAP 8x8 armored vehicle. In September 2024, Tata Advanced Systems signed a deal with Morocco to build and integrate the WhAP wheeled armored platform, an 8x8 armored vehicle, with the first units handed over to the Royal Moroccan Army by October 2025. Rather than a simple ship-it-and-done export, this deal set up local production inside Morocco itself, a technology transfer and co-production model that signals a level of trust well beyond a one-time sale. An Indian-designed armored vehicle is now being built on North African soil for a foreign army. 10 years ago, how many people would have predicted that direction of trade? Number 7. Sniper rifles. In February 2026, Bengaluru-based SSS Defense delivered what is being described as India's first-ever sniper rifle export. A fully Indian-designed and manufactured .338 Lapua Magnum caliber rifle, sold to an undisclosed partner nation. The same company holds close to $50 million in sniper ammunition contracts spread across multiple countries and has set a target of producing 100,000 weapons by 2027. This is a genuine first, not an incremental improvement on an existing export line. A category of weapon India had never sold abroad before, now moving out the door. Precision sniper rifles sit in a different tier of manufacturing difficulty than mass-produced assault rifles. Barrel tolerances, recoil management, and long-range accuracy at extreme distances all demand a level of machining precision that most defense manufacturers never bother building at all. A private Indian company doing this well enough to win a foreign military contract on its first attempt is not a small technical achievement. Worth noting honestly, not every small arms story on this list is a current success. The AK-203 rifle, built at the Korwa plant in Amithi as an Indo-Russian joint venture, is a genuinely capable weapon already being issued to Indian soldiers. But it is still aiming for its own export debut only by 2030. A reminder that some of these wins are still years away. Number 6. Aircraft and patrol vessels. Two categories share this spot because they tell the same story from different directions. Air and sea presence, exported to smaller and mid-sized navies and air forces that need reliable, affordable equipment rather than the most expensive option on the market. Hindustan Aeronautics Limited's Dornier 228 utility and maritime patrol aircraft is now flying under multiple foreign flags. Guyana's Defense Force received 2 aircraft in April 2024 and 2 more in early 2026 under a line of credit arrangement. Sri Lanka operates 1 with a second on order. Seychelles received 2 as a gift from India, and Bangladesh's Navy reportedly operates several for maritime patrol. On the water, India's naval export story started even earlier. Mauritius received India's first ever warship export, an offshore patrol vessel, back in December 2014, followed by Sri Lanka in 2015. Since then, patrol vessels and fast interceptor craft have gone to the Maldives, Seychelles, and Mozambique as well, though several of those were delivered as aid or gifts under lines of credit rather than straightforward commercial sales. Vietnam is now negotiating what would be the first major commercial sale of India's newest generation offshore patrol vessel class, alongside more than a dozen additional high-speed patrol boats under a $500 million credit line, roughly $300 million of it earmarked for the vessels themselves, and $200 million for upgrades including submarine batteries. Vietnam already operates a dozen smaller Indian-built patrol boats from an earlier order, part built in India and part built at a shipyard inside Vietnam. The Philippine Coast Guard has separately been reported as considering Indian-built patrol vessels of its own to expand its presence in the South China Sea, again at the consideration stage rather than a signed contract. Number 5. Swathi Weapon Locating Radar. The Swathi radar, developed by DRDO and produced by Bharat Electronics Limited, tracks incoming artillery, mortar, or rocket fire and calculates the exact location of the enemy battery that fired it. Armenia has operated Swathi systems since around 2020 in a deal worth roughly $40 million for 4 radars, notably chosen over competing Russian and Polish systems. More recent reporting points to a new, so far unnamed export customer being lined up following Armenia's experience with the system. These relationships have been quietly running for half a decade, proving reliability long before this current export boom made headlines. Counter-battery radar is also a category where reputation compounds slowly rather than exploding overnight. A system either correctly locates where enemy fire is coming from under real combat stress, or it doesn't, and there is no marketing campaign that substitutes for years of a customer simply not complaining. Armenia's continued reliance on Swathi years after the original purchase says more than any brochure could. Number 4. ATAGS Howitzer. The Advanced Towed Artillery Gun System, a 155mm/52 caliber howitzer jointly developed by DRDO with Indian industry, has already been field tested by Armenia across both mountain and plains terrain, with an initial 6 units delivered. Armenia is now in negotiations for a further batch, with reported figures for the total order ranging as high as the high 80s to over 90 units. Saudi Arabia has separately shown interest in ATAGS following its deployment in Armenia, according to multiple defense reports. Armenia has also requested minor customization on its own order, including an Armenian language operator interface. Number 3. Pinaka Guided Rocket System. The Pinaka multi-barrel rocket launcher moved from unguided rockets with a roughly 37 to 45 kilometer range to a guided variant reaching about 75 kilometers, with DRDO testing pushing toward 120 kilometers and beyond. Armenia received India's first Pinaka regiment in November 2024, and in March 2026, Yantra India Limited shipped the first ever export consignment of the guided Pinaka pods, GPS, and inertial navigation guided, over 90% indigenous content. France has reportedly shown active interest in Pinaka, particularly the guided version. When a founding NATO member starts seriously evaluating an Indian artillery rocket system, that alone is worth pausing on. What does it say when a country that has spent decades building its own advanced weapons industry starts looking at India's instead? That's worth a comment. Number 2. Akash Air Defense System. Akash, a mobile medium-range surface-to-air missile system developed by DRDO with production by Bharat Dynamics and Bharat Electronics, secured its first confirmed export customer in Armenia, a deal worth roughly $720 million for 15 systems, with the first battery delivered in November 2024 and a second consignment following in mid-2025. Since then, DRDO's own leadership has confirmed new export breakthroughs into Central Asia, with systems now heading to Tajikistan and Turkmenistan, alongside at least 3 additional countries reportedly evaluating a purchase. Akash also operated alongside India's S-400 and other air defense layers during Operation Sindoor in 2025, giving the system genuine combat exposure rather than only laboratory testing and export brochures. A missile system that has now been proven under real conditions carries a different kind of credibility with foreign buyers than one that has only ever been demonstrated. That shift alone may explain a large share of the recent surge in interest. There is also a pricing story underneath the combat story. Comparable Western and Russian medium-range air defense systems routinely cost several times more per battery and often come with years-long delivery backlogs since major powers prioritize their own militaries and closest allies first. A country that cannot get to the front of the queue for a Western system or cannot afford one at all suddenly has a combat-tested, more affordable alternative willing to actually deliver on a reasonable timeline. That combination, in which is proven, affordable, available, is a harder sales pitch to beat than any single technical specification. But before we move to number 1, there are 2 more categories that deserve to be mentioned. They are not in the main ranking yet because India is still building its export record in both of them. But the progress is already strong enough that they could become much bigger stories in the years ahead. The first is torpedoes. India already produces the Varunastra heavyweight torpedo for the Indian Navy, a weapon designed to track and attack enemy submarines underwater, including quieter submarines that are much harder to detect. At the same time, Indian engineers are also improving lightweight torpedoes with better batteries, higher speeds, and more advanced systems for identifying real targets in difficult underwater conditions. So the technology is clearly moving forward. What India does not have yet is a major publicly confirmed foreign export customer for these systems. And that is the only reason torpedoes are not higher on this list. But if that first major international order arrives, this could quickly become another important defense export category for India. The second category is drones. India has been expanding drone and counter-drone manufacturing very quickly, with private companies building new facilities and winning large orders from the Indian military. That is important because modern warfare has made one thing very clear. Drones are no longer optional equipment. They are becoming a major part of surveillance, targeting, battlefield intelligence, and protection against enemy attacks. India is building serious capability here, and the next big step is turning that growing domestic strength into major export wins for Indian-designed drones in global markets. India is no longer simply trying to buy these technologies from outside. Indian companies are building the factories, developing the systems, improving the technology, and preparing to compete for international customers. So torpedoes and drones are 2 categories worth remembering, because the next time we make a video like this, there is a very real chance that one of them will no longer be sitting on the sidelines. Moving on to number 1, where there really is no competition, because there is one Indian weapon that has done more than almost any other to change how the world looks at India's defense industry. It has already been bought by foreign militaries. It has now been used in real combat. More countries are lining up for it, and its customers are appearing in some of the most strategically sensitive parts of Asia. BrahMos supersonic cruise missile. BrahMos explains why India's defense export story is being taken far more seriously today. BrahMos is a supersonic cruise missile developed jointly by India's DRDO and Russia's NPO Machino-Stroyenia, and one of its biggest advantages is speed. BrahMos can travel at around Mach 3, which is roughly 3,700 kilometers per hour. That means once it is launched, the target has very little time to detect it, track it, and respond. It can also attack in different ways. The missile can fly at a higher altitude for part of its journey, or it can come down extremely low and skim close to the surface, in some cases at around 10 meters above sea level. Flying that low makes it much harder for radar systems to detect the missile early, which gives enemy defenses even less time to react. The export version of BrahMos has a range of around 290 kilometers, while India has also developed much longer range versions for its own armed forces. The Army's extended range variant can reportedly reach up to 800 kilometers, giving India a much larger strike radius for its own defense requirements. And India is not keeping this capability only for itself. The Philippines became the first foreign customer for BrahMos through a deal worth around $375 million. That agreement turned BrahMos from an Indian strategic weapon into a serious export product. Then came more interest from Southeast Asia. Vietnam was reported to have followed with a deal worth roughly $629 million, while Indonesia also moved to expand its own purchase, with reports suggesting an order involving multiple BrahMos batteries. And this is where the geography becomes very important. The Philippines, Vietnam, and Indonesia all sit around some of the most strategically sensitive waters in Asia, especially the South China Sea and the wider maritime routes around it. Indonesia is also located close to the Malacca Strait, one of the busiest shipping routes in the world, where a huge amount of global trade passes every year. So BrahMos is not being bought simply because it is fast. Countries are looking at it because it offers speed, range, precision, and coastal defense capability in regions where control of the sea can have enormous strategic importance. That is what makes BrahMos such a major success for India. It is no longer just a missile developed for Indian forces. It has become one of the most visible symbols of India's growing ability to design, produce, and export advanced defense systems to countries that have very real security concerns of their own. In May 2025, during Operation Sindoor, BrahMos missiles were used in real combat for the first time, reportedly striking military targets with enough precision that the former head of BrahMos Aerospace said he could identify the missile from the impact signatures alone. A missile that had spent 2 decades as a demonstration item at defense expos suddenly had genuine battlefield proof behind it, and export interest accelerated immediately afterward. India has since inaugurated a new production facility in Lucknow, rated for roughly 100 missiles a year, built specifically to keep up with next-generation demand. The Philippines, Vietnam, and Indonesia have one obvious thing in common. All three sit along contested waters bordering the South China Sea. The Philippines specifically ordered BrahMos for coastal defense batteries positioned to cover its exclusive economic zone in exactly the waters where it has had repeated standoffs with Chinese Coast Guard vessels. Vietnam has its own long-running maritime disputes in the same sea. Indonesia, while less directly confrontational, sits along the same strategic waterway and is simultaneously deepening defense ties with India on submarine batteries and port infrastructure near the Malacca Strait. It's also worth naming the scale of what BrahMos alone has done for India's export numbers. A single missile program, once dismissed internationally as a joint venture curiosity between two countries with modest export track records, is now the centerpiece example cited in almost every article written about India's defense export boom. When one system does that much of the heavy lifting, it earns the top spot on more than just this list. Look at the map this countdown just drew. Armenia in the South Caucasus, Vietnam, Indonesia, and the Philippines along the South China Sea, Tajikistan and Turkmenistan in Central Asia, Saudi Arabia and the UAE in the Gulf, Guyana in South America, Morocco in North Africa, Mauritius, Seychelles, and Mozambique in the Indian Ocean, Sri Lanka and Bangladesh on India's own doorstep, component-level buyers inside France and the United States. That is not a success story confined to one continent or one category of buyer. It is a genuinely global spread, built system by system, deal by deal, over less than a decade. India still spends a smaller share of its economy on defense research and development than countries like the United States, China, and Russia, and there are still important technologies where India depends partly on foreign suppliers. But that is exactly what makes India's progress so impressive. Because even while the country is still closing some of these technology gaps, Indian defense companies are already exporting weapons, systems, and components to more than 80 countries around the world. It is building its own missiles, artillery, radars, aircraft components, and defense systems while simultaneously strengthening the technologies it still needs to master. And the change is already visible internationally. Indian-made components are now part of global defense supply chains, including parts for aircraft such as the Apache helicopter produced through facilities in Hyderabad. So the bigger story is how quickly the gap is closing. A country that was once known mainly as one of the world's largest buyers of foreign weapons is now becoming a serious supplier itself. A large share of these deals started on a trade show floor. Def Expo, held every 2 years and rotated between Indian cities, has grown into one of the largest land, naval, and internal security defense exhibitions on the calendar, with foreign delegations, defense attachés, and procurement officers walking the same aisles as domestic manufacturers. Aero India, the aviation-focused counterpart held in Bengaluru, does the same thing for aircraft and aerospace systems. These events matter more than they sound like they should, because a foreign buyer evaluating an unfamiliar supplier wants to see the hardware in person, ask blunt questions to the engineers who built it, and watch it perform in a live demonstration. It's a slow, unglamorous part of the story compared to a missile strike or a signed contract, but it's where a lot of these relationships actually begin. Armenia's defense delegation, the Philippine Navy's procurement teams, and reported Saudi and French evaluators have all been present at these events in recent years, well before any deal made headlines. There's also a simpler way to measure how far this has come. A decade ago, a video listing weapons the world buys from India would have struggled to fill even 3 or 4 confirmed entries, most of them small patrol boats or non-lethal equipment. This one filled 10 confirmed chapters, named 2 more worth watching, and still had to leave out smaller deals. Today, roughly 45% of a rapidly growing export total comes from private Indian companies that in many cases did not even exist as serious defense manufacturers a decade ago. That shift from a closed, state-dominated import economy to one where private manufacturers are winning contracts with foreign militaries on their own merit is arguably the more important story buried inside this entire countdown, more than any single missile or howitzer. If this changed your thoughts on how India's place in global defense manufacturing looks, act on it 3 ways. Subscribe, because the follow-up on these still pending deals, Vietnam's patrol vessels, Armenia's expanded ATAGS order, France's Pinaka evaluation, is already being tracked for a future video, and so is a deeper look at exactly which categories India still depends on foreign suppliers for. Do like this video and share this with one person who still pictures India's military as purely a customer in the global arms trade rather than increasingly a supplier in it. Thank you for watching. I will see you in the next one.